All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and today is a very important episode for you. Ben and I are revisiting the very reason why we started the podcast in the first place, because of the proliferation of social media advertising that is in everyone's face. What else do we cover, Ben?
Well, Bryce, it's Spruiker country now, and we've got to make sure that this is a consumer awareness message, and we're going to unpack the playbook and also the tactics and use some examples of what Spruikers are using today to attract you to the dark side.
Folks, this is as important today as it was 10 years ago. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance, and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and welcome back to you too, Ben.
Thanks, mate. There's a big episode today.
Yes.
We're talking about something very close to my heart. I've spent a fair bit of time in this space learning about these operators, so I'm really excited about where we're going today.
Hang on. I didn't know we were talking about the Collingwood Football Club. You didn't tell me that in the rundown.
No, and I'm not talking about. I mean, that's my passion project. No, I'm talking about an industry passion project.
Thank God for that, because I was about to switch off, mate, and that's not good for you because we both got to stay here for that. But no, you're right. It's something that you and I started the podcast about. This 10 years ago, we started because of the topic that we're talking about today. And the reason that we're talking about it today, 10 years later, is because it keeps on rearing its head. It is the number one thing that people need to be aware of. And we are going to not only bring it back to the top of everyone's mind, but we're also going to, the episode is same old tricks, new disguise, but also just a couple of extra tricks that people need to be aware of too, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, if I cast my mind back to when, we originally set up the business and the ethics and the way in which we wanted to operate. And then I found the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, which is the Peak Industry Association. I then did my QPIA under that Peak Industry Association. I then got active in that association. I then joined the board of that association. I then became the chair. I think for about 6 or 7 years of that association, I was expelling operators who weren't acting within the code of conduct. I was seeing how they were operating. I was seeing how their interests were outweighing the interests of the customers that they were serving. So I've got a long history in this particular space. And then off the back of that, we set up the Consumer Association, which is the PICA, which is the Property Investors Council of Australia. So I've been involved in the Trade Association very heavily. And now obviously I'm the chair of the Consumer Association, which is run by property investors for the benefit of property investors. And so what I'm seeing, Bryce, and why I asked, can we go back to why we're fixing these bad haircuts? Because I want to prevent more people from getting bad haircuts, because I'm seeing the rise of the property spruiker coming back in again, and they're well funded, and we're going to talk about that. So I think it's just an important episode to just get an understanding. So it's almost a consumer protection episode that we're going to be running today.
And we should also talk about something too, Ben, because you and I have a commercial business that serves property investors, right? So sometimes people can go, hang on a second, you two, are you really independent? You sit there and you two run a business that has a commercial gain. So a quick history lesson for everyone, and people could take it or leave it, right? It's for the new people to the
community
audience, but I'd like to think that the weight of feedback that we get around this podcast that you can see through our 5-star reviews might support this, so it doesn't sound self-serving. But we genuinely started the podcast as an outreach program to give back and to try and stop people getting burnt. Has the podcast benefited us and our business in the 10 years since we've done it? The answer is yes, it has. There is no doubt about that. But I want I want to lean in and let everyone know we did not start the podcast as a marketing tool. That is the truth, hand on heart. Feel free to fact check that with whoever you know. Has it been benefit to the business? Yes. But it started where you and I, we used to have an office down in Howard Street in North Melbourne, and it was one of those corridor conversations where I said to you, look, I just spoke to another one who got stung, and you're like, the typical, what do you do about it at the time? And there wasn't any meaningful way to get in front of people's decisions. It was hopefully we were doing enough to position ourselves in the market as people that you could use as a guide. But quite often we would have people come in and we'd have to undo it. We start the book, we started the podcast, we start by saying we had to fix bad haircuts. And then now we are still 10 years down the track, still trying to do the same. So a couple of things. We've tried to not be commercial on the podcast. Yes, we've done occasional plugs of our book. We've done occasional plugs of our webinar, which we will talk about another webinar today. But largely we've tried to keep it as clean as we possibly can from two guys who are trying to be as independent as we possibly can, whilst never hiding from the fact that we have our own commercial business in this space.
Correct. We are not independent. We would not be judged as independent, but we are barbers. And when you talk about property investing, you're talking to a barber who thinks you need a haircut to get involved in property investing. But we think that there's a right way to invest, and we also think that there's a wrong way to invest. And we think that there's a right way in which you should be paid. And we think that there is a hidden way in which a lot of people are paid in our industry. And that all stems, just for everyone's understanding, that property investment, i.e. direct residential property, is not a licensed investment product. And by not being a licensed investment product, it means that anyone can sit here and tell you that property is a great investment, and they can tell you all about the tax benefits, and they can tell you about all the upside, and they can earn very large commissions. And some of those commissions in some states and territories aren't disclosed. They're not disclosing that potentially builders who they are, selling their product, they also have an interest in the company that's basically selling the advice, so-called advice. So I think it's really important to understand that without that regulation, you potentially have these spruikers or these operators who are either enthusiastic amateurs and don't really have a clue in terms of the risk, the financial risk they potentially could be putting households under, or they are totally self-interested. And it's all about making as much money as they can for themselves. And if people aren't smart enough to do their own due diligence, then that's not our fault. If they decide to buy our product and we tell them it's a good product and they don't believe it, well, that's a difference of opinion is their argument. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding in terms of whether a new property or a house and land or an off-the-plan property is going to perform well compared to an existing property where there's more land to asset ratio portion in there. And we'll put that argument up against anyone, anytime, and have a look at the numbers because it's evidence-based. It's all in there in terms of what's going to be a better investment. But what we're seeing is, for those people who aren't doing their research, is that they're potentially getting caught early in these social media traps to come in and listen to these operators. And again, they're very convincing, and potentially 70 to 80% of what they're saying has some factual relevance to it. But it's that final mile of information that they withhold from you. And that information is critical for your own assessment and due diligence and judgment about who you should be working with and how you should be operating.
It's a good way to look at it. It's like that last mile delivery service. It's the last mile that a lot of people get caught up on, which is... So, folks, we are going to go into this in a bit more depth, but we hope that Ben and I judged. We had to make a decision around pride versus profit because at the end of the day, with what we know and the influence that we could potentially have in the marketplace, we could have gone down the path that a lot of people have gone down, and it would have been very, very lucrative to us personally, but we didn't do that, right? So we're not suggesting that we're not commercially successful based on what we do in the marketplace, but that's the context. So we're just front-footing that, Ben, because we're trying to give people advice to not get burnt. People say, how does that work with you? There it is, right? But we're going to go into the Spruikers Revisited today. Before we get there, Ben, we just want to let everyone know that we actually have a webinar, upcoming webinar. It's on the 25th of March. It's at 7:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. The topic is how to retire on $3,000 per week. obviously, we're just about to launch our book of the same name. And you can go to thepropertycouch.com.au/webinar. But here's what I want people to do is later on in this episode, we're actually going to give you warnings about webinars, right? So we are saying, come and listen to our webinar. And then later on, we're going to say warning around attending webinar. So what we want you to do is take that as an invitation to join us, but also overlay it against the feedback that we're going to give you in a little while to see if our audio matches our video on what we're going to hopefully teach you today to look out for. So there you go. Check that out, folks. thepropertycouch.com.au/webinar, Tuesday, the 25th of March at 7:30 p.m. Ben, I reckon I've got a quick mindset minute and then we'll get straight into this because clearly you and I are very, very passionate about it. But as I was thinking about this topic today, you and I have spent a lot of time over 10 years trying to help people get the knowledge, right? But then you've spent 10 years saying knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it. So success equals knowledge plus action. But I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think that there's another piece to that particular equation, largely through reflecting on my own journey. And also, as much as we were bewildered in the early days when we set up the property couch as to another one got stung, I'm is equally bewildered by, okay, what if we get people who step into the arena and they build a plan and then they take action and then all of a sudden stuff happens and they derail? What's that all about? And so I've come to the conclusion that the updated formula is success equals knowledge plus action minus leashes. And the leashes is the stuff that people bring. You're the leash, right? You're the problem. This is where most of the transformation lives. But leashes look different for everyone. Because if you think about some of the people, Ben, that we've executed a plan for, and they're going along swimmingly. Yeah. And then there's other ones that just derail, and we go, how did that even happen? And it largely comes down to leashes. So you're either holding the leash or you're being held by it. So here's the top 5 leashes. And there's more than this, but number 1 is fear of failure. What if I mess up? That's a big one. Yeah. Number 2 is fear of success. Not a lot of people think about that, but what if I'm actually successful? What does that mean if I stick my neck out in the gazelle in the wild that is separated from the pack is not very safe, right? So there's actually a fear of success. Yep. There's also perfectionism. I am a recovering perfectionist, not 100% recovered, but I've obviously spent a lot of time on that. There's the imposter syndrome, and then there's toxic environments. Who are you surrounding yourself that's helping you be a leash? So, Ben, I just wanted to land the plane for those folks today, because if we've been spending time upgrading everyone's thinking about it, it's knowledge plus action. It's also minus the stuff that we get in our own way, the stuff that's between our head. And maybe I do I do a mindset minute and a life hack all the time, and it's largely around trying to get people to think differently. I'm trying to come up with new ways for people to have a different angle or a different perspective on the way that they think about wealth creation, because folks, it is super simple. It's actually strikingly simple to create wealth in this country, but if you can't get your own leashes out of the way, oh boy, there you go.
I like it, Bryce. I like it a lot. Thank you for sharing.
So ponder that. All right, Ben. Same old tricks, maybe a couple of new ones with a new disguise. That's what today's topic's about. Spruikers Revisited. Yep. We just gave a little intro as to why we were covering this, but we know that spruikers evolve, and we want to make sure that we give everyone a chance to see what that looks like. I'll give you another example, Ben. The amount of times you and I have had someone come up to us and they've gone, I love the property couch. Great, perfect. And this is probably, first 300 episodes. Now we're in the 500s. Yeah. I've listened to every episode. I'm going, great. What have you done? And they go, I just bought an off-the-plan apartment. I'm like, really? Have you really listened to every episode? Like, because if you have, you would never have bought an off-the-plan apartment. So you and I think that this has been done and dusted, but it's timely that we tackle it again.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, what these spruikers do is they evolve, and then they dissolve. Like, let me explain that to you. So having, been doing this for decades, from the original Spruikers, they build up their business and then they dissolve those businesses. And so at the moment, we're in that sort of evolving stage where they're emerging again. And then all of a sudden there will be some type of transaction or change that happens, and then they'll dissolve those businesses and go off with their pockets full of cash and not have to worry about you. So I've got more to say about that later, but it really is, quite important to understand just how long a business has been around for, how long do they intend to stay around for, especially if you're signing up with them for some type of lifetime membership, or some, lifetime sort of program of work and support they're going to give you. They just collapse those businesses. And I think that's really history. History says, they evolve and then dissolve, and then they work out, okay, what went right last time? What do we want to keep using? And then what are we going to try next? Because at the end of the day, they're sales businesses.
Yeah, and I mean, you and I have been doing this for a long time. I've been on the circuit, if you like, since 1998. So I've seen a lot of people come and go. We're going to talk about some people later on in this episode that have actually been on their sort of moment in the sun, and then what actually happened to them. And they're the people that we can actually look in the rear vision mirror. But right now, as we're speaking, there are people who are building cases that will, in some point in the future, end up being the people that we talk about in 10 years' time. That's just a fact. So let's remind everyone what a spruiker is, Ben. There's three people in the marketplace. There is an advisor who receives an income from the person that they're serving, and they serve no one else. It's a clean, conflict-free relationship. At the other end of the spectrum, there is a salesperson who is selling a product on behalf of a seller, and the consumer in the marketplace knows exactly that's what they're doing. They are there to sell on behalf of someone else. Therefore, caveat emptor, buyer beware. And then in the middle, there's the spruiker, who pretends to play in one space and actually lives in the other. And that's someone who is actually selling a product for someone else who's got an interest that's not yours as the consumer, but they pretend that you are their intended interest. So therefore they go, I'm giving you advice because this is the best thing for you, but they're not being paid by you, they're being paid by someone else. And that is ultimately what the spruiker is, someone who is dancing with a conflict of interest.
Yeah, and potentially if you ask them the hard questions, they're either going to tell you the truth or they're simply going to lie. They're simply not going to tell you the honest truth. So you might ask them a direct question. Okay, so if you work for me, but it's a free service, how do you get paid? Number one. And they say, oh, well, we get paid via the builder or developer and so forth. Well, how much is that? And they might say, oh, look, I get paid $10,000. Now, that's what they might earn, but the actual payment could be in the vicinity of up to $50,000 of money that goes to that company, of which is then distributed out amongst all of those people inside that business. So it's really important that they said, oh, I didn't tell you the full truth. I just said $10,000. Well, that's okay, because if a buyer's agent earns roughly $15,000 or $20,000, then it's not too bad. But the reality is, for every one of these off the plan or house and land packages, the commissions usually range from $30,000 to $50,000 of what we know. And in a lot of cases, again, these relationships are sticky, and there's lots of people getting kickbacks and soft dollar referral commissions as part of those transactions.
Well said, Ben. So I guess their goal is they don't work for you, they work for themselves. They work for their commissions. Their job is to sell a dream that benefits them first and you second, if you at all. Okay, so that's what they do. So, and here's the biggest spruiker myth, that they have a secret formula that others don't know. They have the truth. They have this formula designed that you will be the secret owner of these secret truths that only you can get through being exposed to their message and their community.
That's secret.
But the thing is, here's the deal. I promise you, everything that we've talked about on this podcast has been around for centuries.
Yep.
It's not new. We've packaged up frameworks and presented information in a way and brought the information to light, which we think is unique and different. However, it's not like we invented gravity. It's been there forever. And so the biggest myth that you will need to make sure you're wary of is that someone who says, we have the answers, we have this little known secret that no one else knows about, you need to come through us. That is the number one thing that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, and obviously off the back of that, it's like, okay, well, how do you make it easy for me? Well, if you start talking in fast tracking me in a certain period of time, like, you can be financially free in 5 years, or you can be debt free in 7 years. So they're touching on those emotional triggers where everyone else who's telling you, this takes decades and compounding returns happen over decades. Well, that's boring. These guys have got a faster, quicker, easier solution for me. So I want to buy into that. And then normally what they would then do is show their success through their social envy posts and how. So I just want to be like them, and ultimately that's the emotional connection that they're making, that you look successful, that you're getting on your private planes and you're showing all of these first class tickets. I want that life. So all of a sudden they're doing a transformational picture around wanting that life, as opposed to businesses like, the ones who are genuine in their intent are saying, hey, look, delayed gratification is real. Hey, look, it does take planning. Hey, look, there are risks. Hey, look, it doesn't always work perfectly as per the plan. All of those things are real, but that's not sexy, and sexy doesn't sell. So, from that point of view, it's a really important message that people need to understand, that they're gravitating to this emotional pull. Because remember, we buy with emotion and then we justify with logic later on. But, they only half bake the logic that they're giving you, because you're naive and you start to trust them in terms of the story, right? Because we all think we know property because I live in one. Right? So how hard is it? I live in a suburb. I understand how subdivisions work. All of those types of things. And that's what they're preying on in terms of your naivety and your inability to do some due diligence and research.
Here's a couple of weapons they use, folks. They use emotion and FOMO, so you need to act now before prices rise. Ben just talked about lots of big promises, like retire in extraordinary short periods of time. They overcomplicate things. There is no need to make financial concepts complex. In fact, if you can't explain what you know simply, you don't know it well enough. So it should be able to be done simply. So here's a big one, and Ben and I were chatting about this earlier today, and we'll expand on it a bit more here, Ben. But they are so savvy around mental triggers that they actually they've looked at their customer journey, and they've found the highest emotion point of the customer journey, and then put pressure on them to give a Google review at that point, Ben, so that people are excited and they've got momentum and they've got emotion, they've got energy. So of course, at that point in time, people are quite happy to get on and do a Google review, because that's the game that we're playing. By being visible when people are doing a digital interview on you, it makes sense that you need Google reviews. So therefore, if they were to strategically put the Google review at the end of the process, which for full disclosure, we do put it at the end of the process, not at a strategic point in the customer journey, then people will use those Google reviews as a form of social proof to go, okay, well, this is working, I'll actually act.
Yeah, and I think, so we've seen there's great examples that they're at the peak of the excitement. They're about to pay a deposit on something off the plan. And that's when they ask them, how's the process been? It's been great. It's really exciting. So 5 stars every day of the week, not waiting 2 and a bit years for the product to eventually be built, and then no communication, no follow-up, none of those types of things. So to that point, and you can see that when you are reviewing companies, and yes, we have lots of wonderful reviews, and we would love to say that every customer that's ever worked with us has had a magical experience, but that's not the truth. When we've handled over 16,000 transactions with all different parts of our business, sometimes we get it wrong, and sometimes we've got to own up to that, and sometimes we get negative feedback, and that's true. But what you'll do is when you start doing some of that research, you'll see that a little bit more digging, and then you can start to see some of those different types of reviews. And when they are negative reviews, do they own them? Like, do they own them in terms of, oh, look, we're really sorry for that, it's unfortunate? No, they have a counterbalance on that, or a counter push on that. It's like, who are you? We don't know who you are. This is defamatory. We're going to sue you. They go full in attack mode, and that was exactly the same technique that they used and tactics that they used when I was expelling them from the Peak Association. When we found out they weren't operating to a code of conduct, which was full disclosure, we tried to prosecute them, and all of a sudden, natural justice, and they hit this with illegal, and that's their tactic, right? And so again, when you are researching the type of business that you want to work with, Bryce mentioned something really clear on how they're being paid, and really clear in terms of the success stories and the people. Because everyone, if you've done 1,000 transactions, there are probably 200 or 300 good success stories in there, but it's not necessarily all of them that you need to be, you can't obviously review all of them. So you've got to just start doing a little bit more digging around some of those forums and those sites to see exactly what's out there.
Ben, the game's changed a little bit since you and I started, right? Because there wasn't a lot of social media back then, and when you and I first got involved. But I think, and I'd love for you to talk to this, because you recently spoke on this around advertising budgets.
Yep.
Because for a lot of people listening, and for a lot of people who are not listening who have been stung, Ben, it first comes across their feed as they're scrolling, and that's it. That's an important tactic for us to expose, so that people actually know the gravity of the amount of money that's actually been spent.
Yeah, so you will see it. They are spending, from information that I've had firsthand from previous people who have worked in those businesses, where eventually their conscience got the better of them, between anything from $100,000 to $220,000 a week on this marketing. And they might go, well, that's like, how do they make so much money? Well, at the end of the day, they put you into a funnel, and then they'll do an event. And at that event, they'll sell lots of these off the plan or house and land packages. And we're talking potentially a couple of hundred of them, and they might be getting commissions of $30,000 to $40,000. So they may have spent $2 or $3 million over a campaign, but they've just generated $8 million in fees. Plus, if they've got interest in the building company themselves, or vice versa, and then they're potentially going to pick up other types of fees associated with it. They might also have referral commissions coming from the mortgage brokers. There might be lots of different fees that they're also picking up as part of that. And so when you think about their tactics, which is usually, again, make it easy for me, sell me on a dream of something that's quick, i.e. at the moment we're seeing lots of pay off your mortgage in 7 years, and we'll talk more about that tactic later on. But then you've also got the other ones, which is investing through your super by setting up a self-managed super fund. Now, they are really on the edge there, because in a lot of cases, in the research that I've done, they don't hold a financial services license. So they've got to be, if they're promoting setting up a self-managed super fund and operating that way, I can't see how that's not in breach of the guidelines that ASIC put out there, but that's just another example. So they're doing, and then the final one that you're also seeing is, the next boom period is now. And so they're trying to get you, and this might be the last boom period for X number of years as part of that particular story. Bryce and I absolutely know, and we've been telling you forever, there are markets within markets, and there are different cycles within those different markets. There's always a great time to buy property, but the best time to buy it is when you can comfortably afford it today and hold on to it for the long term. And so we've been consistent in that messaging as well.
Yeah, so let's go through. You've teased a few there. Let's double click on a few. So the first one that we see a lot is, and the context is, in our business, Ben, we're usually saying to people, slowly build up your portfolio, right? Pay off the home, buy an investment property, get used to it, maybe buy another one. We don't buy brand new in our business; it's always established. So when our team are at the front line having these conversations, and then someone says, "Oh, I've been exposed to a plan where we buy 4, 5, 6 properties really quickly, and then we sell 3 later to be left with 3." we kind of scratch our heads because we go, well, our plans are actually getting to 2 or 3 anyway, so the same net, but we're doing it in a much more deliberate, slower way, because if you look at the stats, if you have 4 properties or more, you are in the apex of property investors in this country, a very, very small percentage, right? So to say someone should buy 3, 4, 5, 6 in one hit or in a 12-month period, that is really taking them to the red line. And then for them to sell them to end up with the same net is, let's break down why they're doing that. Because they're getting 6 commissions. They might be putting it into their own development company, so they're getting 6 developer margins. They're probably using their own finance company, so they're getting 6 upfront loan fees. They're getting 6 times the value of the property in terms of an ongoing trail from the mortgage book. So you can see that they're actually doubling or tripling their earnings in a very, very short period of time, whilst you take on unnecessary risk and over-leverage yourself. But can you imagine when our frontline team are going, oh, this is our plan. It's actually a little bit slower, a little bit more deliberate, and not as exciting as that. You could see the frustration that can build in some of those conversations, because it's like, these guys have got the big budgets that you just talked to, and they're getting leverage from their message.
Yeah, I think it's really important that what we aren't saying is, if people want to be absolute trailblazers with their own money,
yes,
they want to be super aggressive in terms of for their own risk profile. And let's say they land the plane and they pull it off. The probability of doing the same thing with other people's, with clients' money, and understanding that it's the client's money, it's a completely different story. And so to be able to then pick 6 absolute winners very, very quickly without overexposing or without diversification is nigh impossible. Right? So I think it's really important to just put context around that. So as well as, I can sit here and put, forecast growth figures and yield figures on certain properties and show amazing forecasts. But the reason why we don't let consumers just run with our simulator model is because they can just make the numbers work, right? And so that's dangerous, because the reality is that they then start putting in fake numbers, and basically that tells the story. But it sounds convincing if I'm a consumer and I haven't done my research on that, in terms of buying 6 and that's going to get me into my $3 million Sydney property, because that's the view that they have. So, I mean, we know in terms of working with other professionals in this industry, they've been on our podcast and they've told us their mistakes, and they said they went really hard really early, and then they started to set up trusts and they started to set up complex vehicles, and then the GFC hit, and then all of a sudden they were completely caught out, and it reset their entire portfolio and the deck of cards fell down. When you're playing with other people's money, it's absolutely critical that you firstly try and do no harm, right? Similar to the way in which when we work on body, just, doctors do no harm. So you've got to be very, very careful when it's other people. Like, I don't care what you do individually, but if you then start to spruik your message in terms of this is how I did it, and you're trying to tell a message for thousands of people to do exactly, well, it's just not possible. It's not possible that in the next 2 or 3 years that tens of thousands of people can acquire 6 properties each and then sell them all off. So they've got it's just not practical. So what you are potentially going to see is the spread of that in terms of mitigating risk as part of that particular story. So that tactic for me just brings alarm bells for a lot. But if you're willing to take the risk and lose everything, then maybe that might be a strategy for you. But I would be very cautious in any of that advice.
Not a lot of professions too, Ben, where you can get this overinflated sense of significance too. But money, helping people with money can make you feel like you are a bit of a big wheel, and that significance chase for the advisor is actually addictive. But quite often it comes at the expense of enthusiastic amateurism, and because a lot of people actually believe what's coming out of their mouth, and it feeds into the significance cycle, which makes them feel like a bigger wheel, which gives them more of an overinflated sense of who they are, which means that they make bigger and bolder promises, and it just becomes this perpetuating snowball.
And hence that's why they blow up.
It's dangerous. It's very dangerous. But we're going to see what happens, because we're going to show you a handful of snowballs that have built up, public record stuff, right, in a little while, where that that sense of snowball effect actually did come crashing down. So that's one of the tactics where they over inflate the amount of transactions that you need to do in order to achieve your goal versus the slow and steady wins the race. That's one. Number two, Ben, is the debt-free illusion, the how do you pay off your home quickly? There is a ton of this out there. Seen lots and lots of it. And so who doesn't want to? That's a wonderful hook. Like, who doesn't want to pay off their home in 7 years and do it really, really quickly? So let's unpack this one.
Yeah, so again, with obviously knowledge, first-hand knowledge of how these businesses operate in terms of talking to former employees, it's really clear that there's a couple of basic tactics. The first one, and this is the secret until you get to their masterclass or 2-day workshop or whatever, is actually sell assets that you don't use. So, in this particular case, they were talking about selling watches, selling push bikes, motorbikes, golf clubs, whatever it might be, and just clear off all of your assets and just park all the money in your mortgage. That's number one. Like, okay, that's interesting. And in some cases, if those assets aren't productive or you're not using them, maybe clearing out the garage may not be a bad thing. But then the second part of that, because this is this promise of, debt-free in 7 to 10 years, this is where it gets interesting. So once they've sort of told you about that, they then say, well, what about property investing, where we get an enormous amount of tax deductions and ultimately we get all this depreciation and all these other things. So we can actually make these properties positively geared.
Oof.
So what they'll do is, and if you do your own research and find competitive builders in the same location offering similar products, you will find that the price that you pay on that particular property will be overs in terms of, like, you can't negotiate the price, remember? So first of all, it's non-negotiable. That's
stock
the
list. Take it or leave it. There's the price.
Take it or leave it. Someone else is going to buy it if you don't. We don't care. It's okay. You can all of those sales tactics. But the reality is, if they are $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 above market price, we've talked about this before, where they have a rental guarantee. So they'll meet the difference in terms of the renter that they put in there for you. They have to manage it too, by the way. And then they supplement that income so it looks like it's positively geared in the first, so it's from day one. So all of a sudden now you're getting an extra $30, $40, $50, $60, $100 a week. That's then, so let's model that, $100 a week. And then, so now rinse and repeat, let's buy 3 of them. Let's buy 4 of them. And so all of a sudden you can start to see your principal place of residence mortgage being paid off. And you've got all of these additional assets that are going to grow in value. And then that's how they do it. So they effectively promote this story around positively geared properties that accelerate the pay down of your non-deductible debt, because all the rent from those properties, and we do believe in this, all the rent from any property should go into your primary account.
Yep.
In terms of your not. So that's real, that's true. But then what happens at the end of that 3rd year or 5th year of rental guarantees? Everyone in that block, everyone in that suburb that all of these Spruiker properties were sold in, there's a glut of renters leaving market, and then there's vacancy rates and your rents drop significantly, and all of a sudden the value of the property's gone down, and it didn't value up at market price. And then when they talk about, well, what's the guarantee? This is my other little favorite, Bryce. We'll guarantee that it will come in at contract price. Guarantee. We'll absolutely guarantee it for you. Now, they do that, but what actually happens if the builder goes broke? Because effectively, with every one of these construction programs that they do, and remember, there's over 1,600 builders that have gone broke in the last 12 to 18 months. So what do? Well, that was a guarantee, not by us. We didn't make the guarantee, because we want the guarantee with the company who's selling them, not the guarantee in terms of who's building them. So if they do that with the builder and the builder goes broke, all of a sudden it's like, well, it wasn't our guarantee. We're really sorry in terms of what that looks like. So it's really, really important in terms of understanding where all of these risks lie, because we'll guarantee it'll stack up. And it's like, is it your guarantee? So I have that in writing from your company. And we've even seen these spruiking companies also collapsing on themselves, exactly doing that, where there was too many of those guarantees. All of the properties in the off the plan developments have gone backwards by 60, 80 grand. And so they just close shop, and you just can't get in contact with them, and no one basically comes to the party. But you're still required, when the solicitors ring you, to settle on the contract.
important point alert, folks. Let's just summarize what Ben said. Market value, they put a premium on top. That premium is actually what you're paying to them to pay back to you in the form of a guarantee to get the positive cash flow. Because if you've done any research in property in this country, it is very difficult to get positive cash flow and capital growth without sort of getting into short-term lending markets and higher risk strategies. So the fact that they can do it on a mass scale should be the red flag anyway. But just again, market value, premium, you're paying a premium just to get your money back so that you can create the illusion that you're positive cash flow. And then you are putting that on your mortgage, but you've got to well and truly hope that investment stacks up, because if it doesn't, when you're paying a premium, there's no scarcity, you're probably overpaying. Chances are you've absolutely robbed Peter, Phil, Wendy, everyone just to pay Paul.
And the fact that prices, new construction's gone up by 40%. Like, it's just incredible to see exactly what people are paying for these potential apartments. And we don't know the quality. I mean, there's always those risks, and we talked about those before in terms of these mass built. What's the quality like? What's the sort of challenges there as well?
Next strategy, Ben, is the Supercharged SMSF strategy. So you've got this super just sitting there. Why don't you use it to invest in property and retire rich? Now, in certain circumstances, that is absolutely valid. But again, in the hands of a spruiker, okay, let's go back to our original conversation here. The spruiker's interest is themselves,
selling properties,
not you. So in the hands of a spruiker, your SMSF is a very, very dangerous game to play, because they typically aren't licensed financial advisors. So you are dealing with a licensed financial product. You need to be 100% dealing with someone who is objective, independent, and expert in that space, as well as being licensed. You'll see in a sec that a lot of them are. And Ben, lo and behold, the product that they recommend you should get your self-managed super fund to buy in is an off-the-plan property where they get high commissions. Now, the self-managed super fund environment is a different environment. It's definitely a different environment because of the tax regime being so attractive in there. The gearing benefits aren't as high as outside of SMSF. So quite often targeting higher yielding properties actually aren't a bad idea in the SMSF. However, they aren't necessarily putting you towards the higher yielding properties. Rinse and repeat on what we just said before around the premium paid on the market price to get some of your money back. This is happening in the SMSF property world, and it is a very, very dangerous strategy for a lot of people.
Yeah, and what we found out through Storm Financial, when they were raked through the coals with ASIC, and it did catch Commonwealth Bank in terms of that, they set up these networks of advisors. And those networks of advisors are sitting back going, wow, getting new business in an advisory practice when only around 25% of people pay for advice, it's hard for these small businesses. So the fact that they can get paid to set up a self-managed super fund and then get an annual fee on terms of running the self-managed super fund, and then there's the annual tax audit that go, like, there's a lot of money that spins off self-managed super funds. We've always talked about the compliance costs, and the responsibility is still always with the trustee. So what they're doing is they're sort of, and this is why ASIC sort of has some rules of thumb. 200,000 to 250,000 is what they would think is a minimum size in which would be appropriate to set up a self-managed super fund. Now, there's always exceptions to the rule, but that's a nice rule of thumb. So obviously now you can have up to 6 members inside a self-managed super fund. So they then try and see how many of those people can they pull together to potentially get under this investment. But I've heard quotes as if you've got $120,000 in your self-managed super fund, you could be in a position to invest in property. Now, again, it is about case by case in terms of what is sensible and suitable for those particular people. But the fact of who's actually saying it and who's actually implementing it, because if they're just going out there, but they're saying, well, we're giving you to the professionals, but those professionals are sort of become a little bit more audit takers. They're not necessarily going to push back, because unfortunately that's the fees that they're going to be paid as well. So it's an interesting one, and it's one just to be, I'll say it, I've said it plenty of times, but I'll say it one more time in here to try and bring context. There is a lot of obligation and a lot of responsibility in setting up a self-managed super fund. They are incredibly expensive. They do take a fair bit of time to manage. You can outsource a lot of that management at a cost, but you can't outsource the responsibility. So you would want to be demonstrating a good understanding of your obligations, a good understanding of financial literature, and a good understanding of the investments in which and the investment strategy in which you're going to take to set up a self-managed super fund. Now, if all of those things are not where you're at in terms of your current knowledge, then I suspect spend 5 years in building up that knowledge and have a proven concept in terms of potentially properties in your own name before you then start to consider that. And that's the approach that we also take in our business in terms of it's not appropriate for all people. It's a very sophisticated financial instrument once you bring all the moving parts attached to it. And so you should always seek advice from an independent person, not someone who may have been recommended by the guy who's trying to sell you the property to go and set that up. So, and if they are, ask them if they're getting a fee or a commission or a kickback in terms of sending that over to that particular investment advisor or accountant or whoever it might be.
To lean in on what you said, like you said, take a 5-year run up. Like if your first foray into property investing is through the self-managed super fund league, you are adding a degree of complexity that is just on the learning curve is what I'm saying, the degree of complexity before we even get into structural complexity. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. So, so really with self-managed super fund strategy, if you're being suggested to go into something brand new, please, at the very least, just get 2 or 3 or 4 extra opinions around that, because that is probably the red flag around that. So make no mistake, self-managed super fund with property purchasing is a strategy that can work, right? So Ben and I are doing that, right? Here's the important part. Who is the driver in the bus for that strategy? Is it a regulated advisor driving that? Or is it a spruiker driving that? That is the fundamental question that you need to ask yourself. And these guys are sophisticated. All right, so we've covered, Ben, the buy many, sell a few strategy. We've talked about the let's be debt-free faster than everything else. We just talked about self-managed super fund. Next one we want to talk about is the high-pressure sort of webinar, seminar funnel, right? I alluded to this at the top of the show. Back in our day, there used to be renting out hotels, and we'd physically go to these hotels, but we obviously pivoted, particularly COVID, but even prior to that, we moved into the webinar model where everyone's in the comfort of their own home. But the outcome of these webinar/seminar is for you to typically do one of 2 things, usually both. Number one is to buy highly priced, highly expensive education, number one. And number 2 is to get yourself on an exclusive list that allows you to get exclusive access, VIP access to properties that no one else can actually get access to. And I would say to you that latter is probably something that you would want to not have access to for all the wrong reasons. So access to education and an exclusive list where sometimes they charge you money to just be on the list, Ben, so that you get the privilege of them actually presenting to you. So importantly, I would argue if you cut a lap on our podcast, Ben, how's this for a little bit of grandstanding? If you cut a lap on our podcast, I reckon you'd get more than what you get for the education packages that you spend 10, 15, 20,000 for.
I think there's something in that, Bryce. But I've got famous stories of, again, having been through that circuit for many, many decades in terms of watching how these guys operated. I remember sitting at one where on the seat there was a note that says, if you're ASIC, you need to disclose that you're here under. So obviously the business that were running the seminars were aware that ASIC were on their tail, and ultimately they were sitting back saying, so you need to disclose that to it. And so they would have got advice on that, and the lawyers would have probably had to say, yeah, just put something on the seat so at least you know that they're in the room, so you can potentially tone it down in terms of what you're saying, right? So just again, another example of ASIC they're under-resourced. They're trying to do their best in terms of, getting to these particular operators. But it really is a good point, and it's probably a good segue into, knowing what I've known in terms of prosecuting these types of businesses in my previous role, the sort of things that they have. And so I can give you some examples. There were several businesses under the PIPA umbrella that once we detected how they were operating, and we would ask them, have they got any, sort of correspondent from ASIC yet? And technically they're meant to disclose that to us. And if they didn't, well, then we gave them a warning, and then eventually we'd kick them out. But how ASIC would normally work, so this is so everyone sort of gets a sense of it. You normally get a warning letter. And then obviously after that, there's potentially a notice to produce documentation. So, you've made this claim, you've said this or whatever, please produce that, or they'll find it, some of the advertising claims. And, a lot of the other sort of advertising spruiking that they do, 46% return in 6 months, bank valuation, as a sort of means. But when a property's a market's running really hard, that's not unusual, but it's quite random. There's not a lot of them, but they'll always action that one. So it's giving a false premises that every property that these people are going to buy is going to basically shoot the lights out in the next 6 to 12 months, and they don't always do that. Then you've got obviously infringement notices. So that's potentially where you may get a fine or a speeding ticket as part of that. Then the next one, and this is where ASIC was sort of issuing these to some of these operators was the enforceable undertakings. And so ASIC can accept an enforceable undertaking, which are legally binding agreements where the business commits to specific actions to rectify non-compliance and prevent future breaches. So in some of these cases, ASIC asked them to write to their customer base and tell them, that this is something that they've been requested to do by ASIC. If you ever get a letter from a business like that, you want to be careful in terms of whether they're the business you want to continue to keep working with as part of that. Then there's obviously suspensions and cancellations of licenses. And unfortunately, in the property investment space, because it's unregulated, they can't cancel our license. They can't cancel anyone's licenses as part of that particular story. So that's why, again, people put on nice suits and they go into houses, or they run these big seminars or webinars or online versions of that to be able to do that. So they are, that's unfortunate that they don't then have authority. But if you've been acting as someone issuing a financial advice, then potentially you can still be prosecuted by the law and you can still go to jail for that. And then obviously civil and criminal proceedings, and that's what I'm saying. That's the evolution of that. So when people build investment schemes and they're not licensed to do that, potentially they run the risk of eventually ending up in jail.
Yeah, very nice to know that process, Ben. Hey, listen, a couple of things that we didn't say before when we talked about the webinar. We obviously at the top of the show come to ours, right? So I want you to judge whether we ask you to go on an exclusive list and whether or not we offer you some education that perceived as high price. That's probably
we hit our prices. We didn't tell you what our service was worth. In terms of what you have to pay.
So just that. The other thing I want to do, Ben, is when I first started, I wanted to know the answer to this question of the people that were up on stage, and is it if you were so wealthy, why are you still doing that? So I'm going to actually ask you that question, and then you can ask me that question. But why, Ben, you could down tools now.
Yep.
And you could go and
sail off in the sunset,
travel on the following Collingwood games for the rest of your life, going overseas, watching soccer. So tell me this, because it's what people want to know. Why are you still doing it, mate?
Well, I think if you look at my history, so I did an associate diploma of business in travel and tourism. I then found a job, got a great job at Hamilton Island, and I started building holiday packages and promoting holiday packages and educating people on experiential tourism. And so I did that at Hamilton Island, then Voyages Hotels and Resorts, which is Ayers Rock. And so at the time I was sort of really enjoying, I love travel. It's a big part and big motivator for me in terms of, my why. And, the lifestyle by design for me is part of that particular story. And then, my further backstory, as you know, is my parents would always argue about money. So I never wanted to have a household that had to worry or argue about money. So that's the core motivator for me. But then I just started loving this idea of educating people and then building things that do educate people. And so when we first started Empower Wealth, I said to myself, I never thought it would be the size of a business it is today, but I just said, if we could help 1,000 people, and I used to use the word multi-million-dollar property portfolio, if we could help them build a multi-million-dollar, that changes their lives. They'll never have to worry about money again. Here we are today, and that target's now 10,000 financially free households. And so at the moment, we're getting close to halfway there. So my job's just not finished. I mean, I just do this purposeful and meaningful work off the back of that's the North Star for me. And yourself, and coming along and joining that journey, and then obviously enhancing that journey, and all of the great people that I get to work with on a daily basis who are doing that work meaningfully and respectfully and humbly for the clients who give us that opportunity. That's the reason why we do it. And so at some point I will hang the gloves up, and I will be basically saying so, but that's the target that I'm going after. And I think at that point, the next generation of people inside the group or the business, they'll carry that forward. And I can see those households building generational wealth and then building out that sort of story. So then it becomes exciting in terms of what do they do with that money? Do they build education trust funds and all these types of things for the next generation, and all of that coming through? So yeah, I just love helping people, and I love building things that help people, but I want to do it ethically and respectfully, because it's their money, it's not mine. And I know how hard I worried and worked to get my money to where it is. So I want the same experience for them. But I wish I had some mentors and some guide who weren't trying to flog me properties, off the plan.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Now you, Bryce, tell me what motivates you to keep turning up and doing the work that you do?
Growth and contribution is the short answer. So what do I get out of doing this outside of money? I get an opportunity. Like I'm such a better advisor today than I was when we started this podcast, and that's because you and I have to challenge ourselves to grow all the time. How do we explain that more simply? How do we put that into a framework? How do we synthesize that so it makes more sense? So that's it. Like, I've got a very active mind, and I know you do too, Ben. So sitting by the pool with pina coladas is fun for 5 minutes, but I would drive my wife mad, right? So, and then if you even think about the self-interest that I get this year, Ben, we're taking a group of incredible humans who are prepared to give up their own money, their own annual leave time, their own family time, to come and spend time with you and me to raise money so that we can actually help other shut the gate. Like, I wouldn't have got access to being around those people if it weren't for this. There's the connections that I get within the business, and the fact that contribution is big for me. So there's part of our team, Ben, that we get to impart the wisdom that you and I have, and we can share it with them and watch them grow. So there is more to what we do than receiving a paycheck for it. So, yep, we could sit down and down the tools, but there is a bunch of other stuff. Now, we also get to have a really cool time in amongst doing that. So we don't give up for my family life, and everything is really blessed. But there is just something that you and I get that's beyond money. That this platform, the business, helping people, and it'll be pretty cool at the end, Ben, when people come up and they're part of that group of people that we've been called to serve, who actually were able to make a meaningful difference in their own families' lives, and then we'll get to rub shoulders with them and talk to them and have share stories and far out. I mean, if that doesn't light anyone up, I don't know what does. And we are in an industry that makes a meaningful impact. We don't make widgets, Ben. We help people have a before and after story. This is what my life was like before. This is what my life was like after. I mean, shut the gate. That is an incredible responsibility and a privilege that we get to do. So my answer to that question is, it's more than money. And I go on great holidays, and I live in a very comfortable house, and I've got a very blessed family life, and I still want to do it.
Yeah, well, and to all of the staff who help us do that, in terms of, because we, if everyone came to you and I for the work, we wouldn't have that work-life balance as part of that. So, I'm forever grateful of the people who, have joined our group and started to, facilitate that so we can magnify that impact. So, yeah, no, very true.
There you go, folks. So it's a question that comes up. I had it myself when I saw the gurus when I was going through the ranks. So I'm sure you got the same question of me and Ben.
I have no appetite for a private jet, Bryce, or a
No.
helicopter or any of that sort of crap.
No. We're still driving around in our old bangers, aren't we? All right, Ben, let's talk about some case studies of, these aren't just theories, these are companies that have actually happened and it repeats itself. And some of these ones we're going to talk about happened in the early 2000s, some of them as recent as last year. But let's just talk about the scenario that we find ourselves. So one particular operator, which was quite significant when you and I were learning the mastery of our craft. We went to these seminars. This particular individual was very high profile at the time. And this is what happened. A little flag is the company that he was involved in was called an institute. There's a flag quite often when they're called an institute.
Yes, they call themselves, yep.
They love to call themselves an institute.
In other words, they're educators.
Yeah,
yep.
Yes. Because university has that sort of that overtone.
Yeah.
So this particular individual had a company that was called something Institute, and this is what happened. He made misleading investment promises. Surprise, surprise. Marketing off the plan as a way to get rich. There's that word, with little or no financial risk. Yes, please. I'll have that, Ben. Little or no financial risk. Aggressive seminar marketing and fraudulent loan applications. This was quite big at the time, Ben, because you didn't have the same consumer credit code regulation that we exist in now. So falsifying documents, pushing through loans without having anything closely representing the truth was commonplace. And so these loan applications using deceptive tactics, sometimes without the applicant knowing that they were doing that, and then manipulating market sentiment through creating a fear of missing out. Act fast, do it now. There's only a few to go. So how did it collapse, Ben?
Yeah, well, effectively at the end of the day, ASIC investigated and exposed that they were using misleading tactics. Investors went on to lose millions of dollars in promised returns that failed to materialise. Then the banks started to get involved in terms of looking at some of the loan applications and found discrepancies in this particular person's property development applications. And so the lesson from this is obviously that there's no such thing as guaranteed returns. There's absolute risk, and that's the red flag. Property investment is always risky. There is calculated risk that you're taking. There are no guarantees in terms of what you're doing. And so we talked again at the start of the year about climate risk and how that's an emerging risk associated with investing. I just want to also say, Bryce, the reason why we're not using their names is because they are, as I said to you, I've been threatened with legal action as the chair of a particular association. And I suspect some of these people may also still lawyer up. And so I think it's important for our community to know that we just don't want to have to deal with any legal, ramifications off the back of this. We'd love to name names, but we just know that, in some cases they'll probably send a legal letter our way, and all of a sudden we'll have to counter that legal letter.
Exactly. So the next one is another high-profile person. It was a man, and this particular strategy was lots of advertising that you could buy a house for $1, often without deposits or bank loans. But make no mistake, there was a very clear strategy as a funnel to get people hooked in by that advertisement. And then what happens is they get sold seminars and boot camps for $25,000 plus, Ben, promising life-changing property strategies. There was lease options involved. They were engaging in complex financing tactics around vendor financing. There was which were risky and unregulated, and there was a ton of success stories that were fabricated, misleading, and exaggerated. So obviously hitting all the mental triggers, but a very clear funnel to get people to buy highly priced education. And you can imagine, Ben, $26,000 for education times what, 50, 100 a month? Do the maths. It's
no, and almost bordering on predatory behaviour. Like he was they were preying on some of the more vulnerable people, or they were teaching investors to prey on some of the most vulnerable people with contracts which were absolutely in their favour. And so there was lots of problems with that, hence why ACCC and ASIC got involved, and they found that the claims were false and very much misleading. Consumers lodged those complaints after failing to achieve those promised success. And then the federal court eventually fined this particular person $18 million for this misleading conduct.
So the lesson here is secret investment strategies, that promotion rather than just promoting actual properties, it's likely to be a scam, folks. It's likely to try and fleece you of your money. It's likely to be the person selling the gold tools is making more money than the miner. So have a think about that. Okay, the next one, Ben, was this particular company had a very high profile, particularly for us in the game. Everyone knew about this particular company, but they were offering unlicensed financial advice. So nearly 1,000 people, once they got looked into, nearly 1,000 people were encouraged to invest in property through self-managed super fund, and they didn't have the necessary financial license. So surprise, surprise, they pushed off the planned stock, recommended developer stock, and didn't talk to them at all about alternatives like established property. So they were told to act fast through creating that sense of false urgency. And they made promises that we are hoping to clear up in this podcast, that no investment is risk-free. So saying self-managed super fund is a risk-free way to build wealth still relies on the last mile. I love that what you said before, Ben. It's the last mile, because quite often a lot of these people get everything right until the last mile, Ben. Anything that's marketed as risk-free. But how did that one fall over?
Yeah, so ASIC eventually sued this company for unlicensed financial advice, and the Supreme Court of New South Wales ruled against them in operating outside these financial laws. Now, again, there are several other companies that have done this, because I can also see that the legal letter that we might get from this particular company would say something the likes of, it wasn't hard to work out who they might be. So I'll leave it at that. There is obviously other information that might, link them correctly to that. But I, in my travels as the chair of PIPA, at the time, I heard some unbelievable stories about the call centre and the way in which their sales managers would operate their outbound sales teams. In terms of certain quotes that are just incredible, sort of messages out to the floor along the lines of, if you've got a conscience, you're not in the right building, or if you can't sell, all of these sorts of crazy little things. Exactly. Wolf of Wall Street stuff. So definitely an aggressive business as part of that particular story.
So the lesson, folks, only licensed professionals, financial professionals, can give you advice on SMSF. So beware. Hopefully we've rounded that point. Now, the next one, Ben, is actually recent. It's as recent as last year. And this particular individual was a younger fella, and he was actually very prolific when it comes to advertising through social media. So very social media savvy in the age group. But this particular gentleman and his group of companies, they were also acting as unlicensed financial advisors. So they weren't operating with an Australian financial services license, whilst providing investment advice and managing funds. So the public record talks about over 10 unregistered managed investment schemes, raising over $30 million from a couple of hundred of investors. And here's the challenge. They were promised very high returns, 25 to 50% within 12 to 26 months, creating unrealistic expectations. And here we go, folks. They were encouraged to set up a self-managed super fund to participate, and then often weren't explained, fully explained the risks of doing so. So there's some common themes here, Ben.
This one's almost like a Ponzi type scheme where the new money that is sort of coming in is paying out the old money, which is the classic Ponzi model. I'm not assuming or alleging that this particular company is, if you work out who they are. I'm just letting people know this is the sort of classic example of those investments. Well, one, it was obviously, there's meant to be, statements of advice and product disclosure statements as part of all of that stuff was not necessarily the way in which they were operating potentially. So from that point of view, it's definitely a clear indication of not working necessarily in the investor's best interests.
Now, this last one, Ben, is takes a very special human to be able to be the promoter of this scheme. But this particular individual targets grieving homeowners, right? So it falls into the predatory property advice category.
Yeah.
And they taught investors how to target grieving families, exploiting their vulnerability so that they could buy properties below market value. So what does that mean? They accessed databases that saw people who were falling behind or who had life events that meant that they were vulnerable, and they were taught how to make approaches to them so that they could buy their properties. And I'm not sure it gets any lower than this, Ben, but
no, I think it's pretty ordinary.
High-priced courses again, which teach you how to do this. Now, this is probably a bunch of secrets that should stay secrets. Let's be honest.
Yep.
Reaching the most vulnerable people at a time when they are at their most vulnerable can't be any lower. So there was no regard for ethics. It was positioned as a savvy investment move rather than a morally questionable practice. This particular individual is still subject to ongoing investigation, Ben, but how did it collapse?
Well, effectively, there was an investigation that was led through media, which was great. So someone obviously started to expose what was happening there. And then you saw a special investigation on a current affair uncover a report about this public outrage. And then obviously some of the companies shut down and rebranded due to the backlash. So there's that, that evolution and then basically collapse on itself. That's what these particular operators do.
So if this one's important, if a property strategy involves exploiting people in distress, folks, that's not investing. That's being a predator. That is being a predator. And if you make money by being a predator, I hope the karma.
It's the worst form of opportunism.
Oh.
It's the worst form of opportunism. Yep.
Yeah. Let's hope that. So, folks. So there's 5 examples. I promise you we could have done more. I promise you in 10 years' time, that list will be different, but the same. Mm-hmm. The names will be different, but the tactics will be the same in 10 years' time. So have we done our job here today? Hopefully, we have given you some background that spruikers always evolve their tactics, but the core deception remains the same. There is a conflict of interest. They offer unrealistic promises, and they often mislead in their marketing as a hook to try and get you to listen to what they have to say. So this one's been around for a while, Ben, but we probably should all remember it, that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And if you just apply that in property, particularly for those people who are thinking for the first time that they want to invest in property when they're most vulnerable to be susceptible to these things. If you are listening to this and you know someone who is about to enter the game for the first time, maybe send them this episode so they can have a little lesson. At least they give themselves a chance by knowing exactly what they need to be looking for. But what's interesting, Ben, is I've noticed the energy gets a bit heavy for you and me even. We can feel it just by going and reliving some of that stuff.
Well, it's some of the battles that I've had to go through when I'm dealing with these particular operators, in my public capacity as the chair. I remember they were just exhausting days, long days in terms of that, and obviously lots of threats and all of those other things that go with it. One of the things that I've always sort of thought about for these people, if you're not paying the professional, in other words, the professional is getting paid, what you should say to them is, okay, that's fine. If you really believe in this, then why don't you pay for me to get it independently appraised through a licensed valuer? So you pay, but I get to pick the valuer. So in other words, you can't, get your valuer who's on the hook or a mate or whatever. So yeah, if they've got nothing to hide, then just get an independent valuer and they should be happy to pay for that, because ultimately they're earning tens of thousands of dollars, right? So, and if they're not willing to do that, what does it tell you? What does it tell you? Just sort of says, no, okay. And if they come back and the price is that and everything else stacks up, well, maybe it's an exception to the rule, in terms of what we've been talking about.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that's helped you folks. There is actually some pedigree here. Ben obviously talked about the fact that he's been involved with Pippa and Picker. Personally, property investing, we've helped property investors. I've actually been on all sides of the coin, Ben. I've been on the conflict-free side. I've also been on the conflict of interest side. Way back when I was younger and I was an enthusiastic amateur. So hopefully there's a pedigree there of experience in a cross-section that hopefully reminds people why we started this podcast in the first place. So again, if you know someone or you think someone could benefit from knowing this, or just in the
if there's one podcast to share, it's this one.
Wave of.
It's almost like I'm willing to pay social media, advertising costs myself just to basically get them to listen. This retire dead in 7 years myth busted or something, like where we explain to them this is how they do it.
Exactly.
Yep.
So
it's not right at the time, but it's also not right.
Let us know what you think, folks. Let us know on socials if that was helpful, if you want us to do anything similar to this. My life hack today, Ben, is just this navigating of the electronics policy of our children, which I haven't nailed just by the way.
Oh, yeah.
But
I'm a work in progress too.
My wife and I, Andy and I, are having numerous conversations around what this looks like. And so I stumbled across this and I ran it past her the other day. And there's a few things in here that we because my youngest is going to high school next year. So therefore, that's the transition to needing to have a phone, right? So had it my way, they wouldn't get one till they're 18, just showing my age. But we've got to have some guardrails, got to have a system. So if your child is hoping for a mobile phone, which one of mine is, let them know they need to see these. We need to see these 8 things. Number 1, responsibility for their things. All right. So can they keep track, put away, and take good care of their own things? Because if they can't, well, they can't look after a phone. So that's number 1. Number 2, they've got to make sure that they are displaying responsibility in school. So turning in the assignments, studying for tests, asking for help when needed, reading for leisure, so that we can see that there's not this ultimate distraction. And I'm overlaying this on my my eldest son, who has been at high school now in his 2nd year, just to remind him of some of the privilege not right stuff. 3, good time management. So make sure they still show up, waking up independently, getting crucial things done before fun. That's important. Number 4, good communication skills. So are they participating in conversations? We had family over last night. Are they engaged? Are they talking? Are they sharing their thoughts and feelings? Are they asking for things politely still? And are they a good friend to their mates rather than disappearing into electronics? So that's number 4. 5, this is big for us. If our kids want to play electronics, they have to trade physical activity. So we need to see exercise.
Screen time for screen time.
Playing a sport, doing active things with friends. And then I get up, we go to the beach, we take the boys with us. That's a sign that they can get some electronics later. Number 6 is engagement of life. So make sure they still hang with us, get together with their friends, get involved in the clubs that they're involved with, and have some form of screen time in check. That one is probably a work in progress. Number 7 is impulse control, to make sure that they're controlling anger, not getting run away, still talking nicely to folks, taking responsibility for mistakes. And number 8 is parent connection, open conversations, respect both ways, and having fun together. So for those of who can relate to you and me, Ben, in our community, who A, are parents, and B, trying to navigate electronics,
I like it.
Have a think about those filter. Responsibility for things, responsibility in school, good time management skills, good communication skills, physical activity, engagement in life, impulse control, and parent connection. So,
and I try and get learn before play. I used to say work before play, but it's just too negative. So it's now at least learn before play.
Yeah.
No, our household is an absolute work in progress on this stuff.
Mate, it's just interesting, isn't it? Because you and me, when we used to grow up, we would catch up with our mates down the road at the park or whatever. But now, if they don't catch up with their mates on electronics, they're considered like
Yeah.
outcast because that's
Not
how they,
connected.
that's
Yeah.
that's how they do it. So gosh, we're all up.
Now, we've been watching that show on the ABC. We're only a couple of episodes in, but you just sit back and it's just quite humbling to watch. But, you know, I think the professor on that show says kids are a lot dumber.
Oh,
Like they're a year and a half dumber
yeah.
than what they should be. They're sorry, I shouldn't
Oh.
use the word dumber, but it's a year and a half behind
Delay.
their academia or
Yeah.
delay.
Yeah.
And obviously the frontal cortex takes years to develop up until 25 for young men.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of the best things the government could be thinking about is banning social media and all of those types of things to the age of 16. I think the evidence in that, I mean, yes, our boys can say, I said, Jack, were you just on social media? No, I wasn't, Dad. Mate, I can see that you were.
Yeah. I've got Snapchat too, and I can see you're online.
Yeah, so don't even try to say that you weren't when I just saw you do but it's just this denial, which is addiction denial, right? It's like it's so strong.
Now, folks, parents, this is a hot topic for me. So if any of you have any life hacks for me on the electronics game, please send them to me. I would love to. I'm reading books, I'm listening to conversations, I'm listening to podcasts, but I'm trying to work this out. But interesting, one of my mates who's he's actually younger than me, Ben, but his kids are a lot older. Got married and kids super early. He goes, Bryce, I've narrowed it down to this one thing. I might have told you this before, Ben. He goes, I've narrowed it down to this one thing. He goes, where does the electronics issue happen? I go, well, in the house. He goes, exactly. So therefore, your job is just to get them out of the house because then it will take care of itself. I'm like, well, that's probably the simplest.
No, there's method to that.
Advice I've heard.
Idea for sure.
All right, mate. What's making property news?
Well, it has been a big show, so I'll wrap it up pretty quickly. But what we have seen in some of the latest data coming out through our good friends in CoreLogic is that the top quartile, the top 25% of markets in Victoria and also New South Wales and also to a lesser extent in Hobart, they had a really strong February, and that led to an overall correction in overall values that we saw in the February update from CoreLogic in terms of their hedonic index measure. So this is starting to turn. So the quarterly number is still negative, but traditionally, if we see lower interest rates, what we do see is that that's usually the ripple effect. Starts at the more premium end of the market and starts to flow through. So if that is, now remember, it is, one swallow does not make a spring or a summer, as some people might say, and that is true too. So we're not calling it yet, but if you start to think about another potential rate cut in May, and then obviously another one potentially in maybe November, the indicators are in the right area for certainly the markets that we talked about in our recent outlook. So again, it's not saying that this is happening because we still need to see some more data to inform that view before we call it, but it's a positive signal. And again, we think in decades and so forth, but there are some people who are still maybe sitting on the fence thinking about buying into some of these markets. Well, it does tell you that it doesn't take much for that momentum to shift and that mindset to shift, especially if you're out in the field. And our team of buyers agents have definitely reported back to both of us about the number of people in open homes. So it's definitely so it's whether that sustains that open home activity and just how deep that, that depth of demand is. And if we do get another rate cut, I suspect that depth will start to increase and that is going to put upward pressure on prices.
All right. Very well said. Good observations. There you go, folks. Is it now the peak of maybe some upswing momentum? Who knows? But good episode today, Ben. Hopefully,
timely warning.
Yep. Exactly. Timely. And hopefully our audience sees it for what it was to just update 10 years on. The reason why we started this podcast in the first place was to help people make sure that they're making informed decisions about their financial future, mate. So well done. Thank you for your participation as always. Until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it and obviously release those leashes.
Yeah. Oh, you did listen.
I did listen.
See you next week, folks.